Welcome back to the All Sorts podcast, everybody. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and following us on X, Instagram, and Threads.
All the socials, yep.
We've got some fascinating deep dives coming up that you won't want to miss.
That's right, folks.
But today, we're taking a trip back to the 80s, a decade of, well, let's just say excess.
Big shoulder pads, bigger hair, even bigger ambitions.
And nothing captures that 80s energy quite like the film Scarface.
Oh, yeah, the 1983 version, of course, not the original gangster flick from way back in '32.
Right. Although both films kind of tap into that whole American dream gone wrong, you know.
The allure of power and wealth, but the dark side that comes with it.
And with the '83 Scarface, there's this added layer of history woven into the story. The Mariel Boatlift.
Which makes this deep dive extra juicy, in my opinion. You've got this iconic movie everyone's seen at least a clip of.
Say hello to my little friend.
Exactly. And then you've got the real story of over 125,000 Cubans arriving in Florida in just a few short months.
It's like, how much is Hollywood and how much is real life?
That's what we'll be untangling today. We'll separate the Scarface fiction from the Mariel fact.
And explore how this mass exodus transformed Miami forever.
And it's a wild ride, folks, so buckle up.
All right, let's rewind the clock back to 1980. Cuba's under Castro's rule. Tensions are high.
And suddenly, Castro makes this announcement, like out of the blue. Anyone who's unhappy with his leadership, they're free to leave. Go on, get out of here.
Wasn't exactly a planned thing, right?
Oh, no, not at all. It all started with Cubans seeking refuge, asylum at the Peruvian embassy.
Ah, I've heard about this. Things got a little chaotic, to say the least.
Oh, more than a little. Castro saw this as, a chance. Get rid of some dissenters, put pressure on the U.S.
Two birds, one stone, as they say.
Exactly. And the Carter administration was, well, let's just say they weren't prepared for the floodgates to open quite like that.
But they agreed to take in Cuban refugees. So it was off to the races, literally.
People scrambling to the port of Mariel, any boat they could find would do.
Over 125,000 people in the span of just a few months.
Right.
Imagine the scene.
It wasn't just families looking for a better life, though. Castro also took the opportunity to empty out some prisons.
Oh, wow. Adding to the whole mix.
Yeah, and fueling some negative perceptions about the Marielitos, which unfortunately fed into stereotypes later on, even in movies like Scarface.
It's interesting, though, because Scarface, while set in Miami during this time, it pulls a lot from that earlier Scarface film, the one about Al Capone in Chicago.
You're right. That 1932 version already established this image of the ruthless immigrant gangster.
So those perceptions were already floating around before the Marielitos even stepped foot in Miami.
And that's crucial to remember. Those pre-existing narratives, they color how the entire boatlift was perceived, both then and even today.
So picture this. Miami, already buzzing with the energy of the 80s, the drug scene, the violence.
And then this wave of Cubans arrives, many with next to nothing.
And the public is already kind of primed to view them with suspicion.
Yeah, thanks to Hollywood, in part. It's a recipe for tension, to say the least.
Miami was a city on the edge, you could say. And the Mariel Boatlift added fuel to the fire.
Both figuratively and literally, yeah. The city was already transforming rapidly, and this influx of people just accelerated things.
It's almost like the perfect setting for a movie like Scarface to take root.
The film captures that 80s Miami vibe so well. The grit, the glam, the sense of danger lurking around every corner.
And it also leans into those stereotypes we talked about, right?
Definitely. Tony Montana becomes this symbol, the criminal Marielito, even though he's a fictional character.
I can see how his story, even though it's made up, would tap into those existing fears. He comes to Miami with nothing, turns to crime, and boom, he's a drug lord.
And for some, that mirrored their anxieties about the boatlift's impact on the city. It's the power of a story, even if it's not entirely true.
That gets lodged in our minds, becomes the dominant narrative.
Even when it's not the whole picture. And that's what we're going to unpack next. We'll separate Tony Montana's Hollywood journey from what the Marielitos actually faced.
And uncover the human stories, the individual experiences that often get lost in the shadow of that iconic film.
All right, so we've set the scene, right? Miami in the 80s, this sudden wave of Cuban refugees, and Scarface using it all as this, backdrop for its over-the-top story.
But what about the actual people, the Marielitos? We've talked about the stereotypes, the fear, but they were more than just a plot point in some gangster movie, right?
Absolutely. I mean, over 125,000 individuals, each with their own story, their own reasons for leaving, their own hopes for the future. You can't just lump them all together.
It'd be like saying everyone on the Mayflower was the same just because they ended up in Plymouth.
Right. You had all sorts on that ship, just like you had all sorts among the Marielitos. Farmers, doctors, artists, families, individuals, all looking for something better.
And for many, it was just that, a chance at a life without oppression. I mean, they faced economic hardship, political crackdowns, limited opportunities back in Cuba.
The boat lift, it was like this, this chance, a glimmer of hope, even if it was a risky one.
I can't even imagine leaving everything behind, risking your life on these overcrowded boats, arriving in a new country where you don't even speak the language.
And then facing hostility, too, on top of it all. It wasn't a smooth welcome, not for everyone. The U.S. government tried, set up temporary housing, places like Fort Chaffee.
I've heard about that. Didn't things get pretty rough there?
Oh, they did. Overcrowded, tensions running high. You can just imagine the frustration, the uncertainty, the sheer scale of it all.
Just starting over from scratch, many with nothing but the clothes on their backs. It's hard to wrap your head around.
But they did it. They found work, any work they could get, learned the language, adapted to this new culture. It wasn't easy, but they built new lives for themselves, against all odds.
Which makes Tony Montana's whole rags to riches story in Scarface seem even more, like a Hollywood fantasy. He goes from dishwasher to drug lord in, like a month?
Yeah, it totally skips over the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the struggles that real Marielitos went through. The film focuses on the flashy, the violent, but that's not the whole story.
It's the everyday resilience, the quiet determination that gets overshadowed. But it wasn't just about individual struggles either, right? This mass migration changed Miami forever.
Absolutely. And it's a classic example of how immigration can revitalize and challenge a community at the same time. You get this infusion of new energy, new ideas, but also competition for resources, cultural clashes.
Miami already had a significant Cuban population, so how did this new wave impact the existing community?
It definitely deepened the city's connection to Cuban culture. The music, the food, the language, it became even more woven into Miami's identity, but it also led to tensions as folks adjusted to this rapid demographic shift.
Like a cultural earthquake, shaking things up and forcing everyone to adapt.
Yeah.
What about the economic impact? We've talked about that stereotype of Marielitos taking jobs, but is there any truth to that?
Yeah. The economic side is tricky. Some researchers argue that the new workers actually boosted Miami's economy, filled labor shortages, spurred new businesses, all that.
So instead of taking jobs, they were creating them. That flips the script.
It does. But other studies show a more complicated picture, suggesting that some low-skilled workers might have faced tougher competition, maybe even lower wages because of the influx of new laborers.
So two different narratives, and both with data to back them up. It shows just how hard it is to really measure the full impact of something as massive as the Mariel Boatlift.
Exactly. It's a reminder that simple answers don't always cut it when you're dealing with complex social and economic systems. There's always more nuance to uncover.
And that brings us to maybe the most controversial aspect of all this, the idea that the Mariel Boatlift led to this surge in crime in Miami.
That's where the Scarface story really takes hold, Tony Montana, the Marielito turned ruthless drug kingpin. It feeds into this whole narrative that the boatlift unleashed this wave of criminals. And that's what we're going to tackle next. We're going to separate fact from fiction, dive into the data, and see what the research really says about the relationship between the Mariel Boatlift and crime in Miami.
So we've really explored the Mariel Boatlift, haven't we? The challenges, the resilience, how it reshaped Miami. But there's this big question that just keeps coming up.
That's right, this idea that it led to a crime wave, like it was this Pandora's box of criminality.
And that's where Scarface really messes with people's heads, right?
Yeah.
Tony Montana, this Marielito turned ruthless drug lord.
That image is just stuck. Even though it's pure fiction, it's become like this shorthand for the whole Mariel Boatlift.
People use it as evidence. It's even made its way into political speeches and policy debates.
It's crazy how a movie can have that kind of power. But that's why we're here, right? To separate the myth from reality.
So what does the research say? What's the truth about the Marielitos and crime?
Well, it's not a simple answer. I mean, researchers have been digging into this for decades, and the results are kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Meaning some studies do show increases in certain types of crime, like property crime and violent crime, right after the boat lift.
But that doesn't necessarily mean the Marielitos were the cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean one caused the other.
You got it. Correlation doesn't equal causation. And a bunch of other studies found that the crime increases in Miami were pretty similar to what other cities were seeing back then.
So it was more like a national trend, not something unique to Miami or the Marielitos.
It seems that way, yeah. It suggests that there were these bigger social and economic forces at play, things happening across the country that impacted crime rates everywhere.
So maybe it's not fair to pin it all on the boat lift.
Right. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but you only have half the pieces. You can't see the whole picture. And even the crime data itself can be iffy. Well, the way crime's reported and measured, it changes over time. Policing strategies shift too. All that can skew the numbers and make it tough to draw clear conclusions.
So more like a blurry picture than a sharp photograph.
Exactly. It's a big, messy gray area. But we gotta acknowledge that, right? Resist the easy answers, the simple explanations.
As when we oversimplify things, that's when stereotypes take root.
You start seeing people as labels, as members of a group, instead of individuals with their own stories, their own complexities.
It's like judging a whole book by its cover, And that's never fair, especially to folks who've already faced so much hardship.
It also prevents us from understanding the real causes of crime, the underlying issues that need to be addressed.
So what's the takeaway here? What's the big lesson we can learn from all this?
I think it's about being critical, questioning those easy narratives, especially when they're about complex social issues. Like Scarface is a great film, don't get me wrong, but it's not a history book.
And the Mariel Boatlift, it shows us that immigration isn't this simple black and white thing. It's messy, it's challenging, but it also brings new possibilities.
It forces us to change, to adapt, and that can be a good thing, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
And just like Miami transformed after the boat lift, our understanding of it has to keep evolving too.
You gotta let go of those stereotypes, wrestle with the nuances, and see the Marielitos for who they truly were, individuals each with their own story to tell.
Beautifully said. And that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Scarface and the Mariel Boatlift. But the conversation doesn't end here, right?
Right. We've got tons of resources in the episode description, so check those out. Go deeper, learn more, keep that curiosity burning.
And if this deep dive got you thinking, come join the All Sorts podcast community. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube, follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads. Let's keep the conversation going.
We love hearing from you folks. Share your thoughts, your own experiences. Let's learn together.
Because the All Sorts podcast is all about this. Exploring the unexpected, busting those myths, finding those fascinating bits of history that make you go, whoa, I never knew that.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep your minds open to all sorts of possibilities.
And hey, don't forget to hit that like button and share this episode with your friends. Every like, every share, it helps us bring more of these deep dives to you. Keep those minds curious, and we'll see you in the next one.